firing public servants willy-nilly, or like autistic Vulcans that have no actual ideological bearing or care about or empathy, and they're just
but it means they're willing to execute.
Tim Miller of the Bulwark had MAGA pundit Natalie Winters on his show to try to explain the way that MAGA defines things and what they're motivated by. It's an interesting conversation. I don't know that she does a good job of actually doing this, but it's interesting to see someone try to explain how the MAGA mind operates. So we're going to take a look at clips from the Bulwark with Tim Miller and Natalie Winters. I'm going to share my thoughts on this too. Let's check it out together.
The real irony of the elites versus everybody else situation is that the guy that Bannon has been championing so aggressively that sent to prison for the past couple of years has actually just handed the country over to elites. So that's kind of interesting. Like, you know, the new Bannon, I hate to say that somebody stole Bannon's clout because he really totally had a ton of clout back in 2016. But Peter Thiel has kind of come in and stolen his bag. And Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are kind of the same guys that Bannon has been able to garner so much populist support for talking shit about. So now I'm sitting here. It's like, it's not the exact same thing as the H-1B visa drama, but I'm like, okay, well, what is MAGA right now? Like, is MAGA the party that's finally standing up to the elites, or is MAGA the party that is transparently being controlled by them?
I think that the inherent connection between elite and billionaire, though, yes, it seems sort of intuitive, I think is maybe a framing that our audience would sort of reject, in the sense that I think to them, their idea of what undergirds or represents the elite class is more sort of the swamp. So when you see, even though it's being done underneath Elon and Doge, but when you see them going after to what their vision is, your average, you know, Ivy League educated USAID contractor who's making millions of dollars promoting cultural filth, that's probably what they would describe it as, in third world countries. I think to them, that is sort of more their conception of the elite. I think it's almost less finance-based.
USAID employee making millions? Who are the multi-millionaire USAID employees? I'm so glad that I've gotten
my first Tim Miller eye roll.
Face? I'm just like, I didn't understand. So the millionaire USAID employee? Who is that?
The $1 million contracts.
But they go to, like, they get contracted out to like a group, to an NGO, and then people work for the group, and then it's like, it's people that are making like $80,000 a year that gave their life to go help the global tour. I think they're making a little more than
$80,000 a year.
Maybe a couple. I mean, but like, these people are not the elites. The people that are in fucking Africa helping.
I'm not
like,
saying the people in Africa. I'm just saying I think that maybe. And I'm trying to help your audience understand. I mean, we can do the back and forth, and we can debate. But I also think that, you know, the Bulwark listeners probably don't get so much of an insight like into what War Room listeners think. So I'm happy to try to convey that. But I'm just
I want to hear it. I'm just trying to understand. That doesn't make sense to me. The USAID.
I think that that
they're mad at. Why are they mad at them?
The War Room kind of Bannon worldview. I think that to us, there's more of like a cultural component to what we define the elite as, and sort of this idea of ivory tower beliefs. And I think that is USAID is maybe a bad example because there's a lot to get into there, but I'm just saying this sort of more globalist orientation, the idea that people would be making six figures promoting this sort of what I'm sure would be referred to as, you know, woke ideology in these third world countries, or promoting gender rights in Africa, that I think the way that you guys sort of term elites, I think that there's an inherent conflation between money and being an elite, which I'm not saying is an inaccurate characterization. I just think, to answer your question, how I can sit here and say, well, we're anti-elite, but we also support the efforts of Doge and what Elon Musk is doing, is because it's not just a money thing. I think it's sort of, there's an ideological prerequisite to be in the basket or the tier of people that the War Room audience, that myself, would consider to be an elite.
So gender rights in Africa, where's the elitism there? Like, because we got Elon Musk offering $1 million prizes to people who are going to vote the way that he wants them to vote in like Wisconsin or something. But that's not elitism. That's patriotism. Elitism is when we go to some country and promote gender rights, or like stopping the prevention of HIV. Like, where does the elitism come in there? Because I guess my whole thing is, I've been seeing Bannon for so long, and a lot of the stuff he says, I'm like, Steve, I think you've got the wrong idea. But then he says the tech bro billionaires are a huge problem in this country, and I'm like, you know what, Steve, I think I agree with you on that. But now the tech bro billionaires kind of are the country, right? So what would Steve say? I mean, I hate to make you speak for him, but you're talking about the war room audience, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. That's cool. It's just the gender equality that's not cool.
Bezos.
I think
I want to stop here for just 1 second before Natalie Winters makes this point here. I think it really comes down to they're just on the side of whoever is on the side of Trump. It's amazing to me. I mean, and I'm just talking about people that I know in my everyday life. They love Elon Musk. They love RFK Jr. And if you criticize those people or you say you don't like them, I mean, they'll practically fight you to the death because you don't like anybody, these people that are associated with Trump. And I've never seen anything like this before. I can't recall, maybe somebody who's a Democratic operative would feel this way, but just people who are Democrats who voted for Biden or Obama or Clinton or whatever, I've never heard anybody say, how dare you not like Biden's defense secretary or, head of HHS or whatever. Most people just be like, I don't really care about that person. I mean, I just voted for Joe Biden. But basically, it really comes down to anyone who is in Trump's orbit, anyone who's on Trump's side, anyone who's an ally of Trump, no matter how much money they have, even the richest guy in the entire world, they don't view them as an elite, which is just, it's bizarre the way that Trump has rewired people's brains. I mean, this is going to be studied for the next 100 years, how people were duped by this guy.
Tech oligarch is sort of its own case. For example, I've been extremely critical of Mark Zuckerberg. Like, I think all the tech bros who are doing the MAGA performative dance, I think that's absolutely disgusting. And I think that our audience should have higher standards than accepting them back into the fold. I think the whole Bezos, whatever, is not very convincing to me. I think the Elon transition is a little more interesting and deserves a little more nuance to look at that. I would sort of reject, I think, some of the premise of your question, the idea that they have totally usurped our country and taken it over, only because I think there's an implication there that what they're doing is something that the American people don't support. And I think this idea that the Doge agenda or that cutting waste, fraud, and abuse is something that is so anathema to the interests of the American people. And that's something that Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are force feeding down the throats. I think the Trump voters knew what they were getting when they were voting for Trump. I think Elon was very prevalently on the campaign trail. I think the concept of cutting waste, fraud, and abuse is not particularly niche. I also think that waste, fraud, and abuse is perhaps the more palatable, kind of simplified version of what, honestly, I think Bannonism in its kind of predecessor form, the idea of deconstructing the administrative state. I think that that's also the other side of the coin with Doge, which I do think is something that is very important for our audience. But in terms of back to the Africa example,
you don't have audience that you have audience that works for the government, though. I guess this is a genuine question. I know that
I want to stop right there for just 1 second. Tim Miller says you don't have audience that works for the government. I bet she does. I bet she does have audience that works for the government. This is one of the areas where I think the pundits make a mistake, is they think that government, I'm talking left and right pundits. They think that government workers are people in DC or working in Berkeley or someplace like that. The town that I live in, the number one employer is the federal government. And basically everybody that I know who works there voted for Trump. They're all right wingers. Now they're losing their jobs and they're saying, how could this happen? I voted for Trump, which was predictable. I mean, I knew that would happen. Same thing with education. I come from a family of teachers. The school system is probably the second biggest employer in the area where I live. Most of the teachers that I know are very conservative and most of them voted for Trump. So I think that's one area where to talk about the elites, the people in media in New York and Los Angeles and now Austin, they think that everybody who works for government or everybody who is a teacher is some crazed socialist, and there are a whole lot of those people who voted for Trump.
I give off sarcasm face, so I'm going to verbalize. This is a genuine.
We haven't even told the audience that we don't actually dislike each other.
I know we're going to get to our Terry Lake encounter at the end.
Okay.
We're going to start with it, but all of a sudden we got
the Muslim Brotherhood. I dropped a bomb.
You dropped Sharia law, and you dropped Sharia law.
I'm not done with the Muslim Brother thing.
Well, and I want to answer your question too, Cameron.
Hold on,
but yes,
but it's a related question. Okay. I'm adding on to Cameron's question because what I don't understand is, like, particularly from the audience's perspective, like we hear enough from Steve. I know what Steve's fucking perspective is. Like, you have people in your audience, I assume, that work for the federal government, that have federal government jobs, that are on government healthcare, certainly. And like, I don't understand what they're getting out of this. Like, I understand being mad about fraud and abuse and like being like happy that Elon is poking the eye of the people they don't like who care about trans people or whatever. But like, I don't get what they're getting so far. Like what are they like? I'm really happy that they've instituted some policy that's going to help me, because like I see a lot of like regular people like losing their jobs, unlike people that are probably MAGA, people that are probably your audience. Like, I don't know, if you work at the VA or you work at one of these places, you could very well be a war room listener.
You don't understand, Tim. Veterans are woke.
It's a lot of stolen valor. No, I'm kidding. No. I think to answer, and again, I have to say, by the way, I love being able to have actual discussions like this because I feel like so much is just screaming on panels. But yeah. I think the sort of juxtaposition there is that, we're all told, and perhaps maybe my characterization of every person that Doge is firing as some woke USAID, Jen Psaki's sister who's promoting trans rights in Africa. Yeah, that's probably not all the people that they're firing. But I think you can also concede that there are some people who have received collectively their organizations millions of dollars promoting stuff that probably could be itemized as waste, fraud, or abuse. And I think maybe our audience is a little more hypersensitive to those issues, perhaps on the heels of what they feel is like unaudited Ukraine aid packages and just billions of dollars overseas to the forever wars that they really dislike. But to answer your question specifically, and I live in DC, so I'm around a lot of people who've, listed their houses and have lost their jobs. Like, the idea that I have to feel really bad about someone who loses their job, who for years has like not been going into an office. I sort of reject the ideological premise of their job to begin with, and they're probably getting an overinflated salary for like really not doing much.
How much do you think government employees make?
Let me finish. That the same, now we're getting a Tim Miller face palm. I'm very honored. But the idea that like I'm supposed to have unmatched empathy for them, but then our audience who, really, I think, was forced to shut down their businesses during COVID and didn't see the outline, the really explanation or justification for that, and felt sort of assaulted in that way.
Well, the Democrats tried to give them money. And the Republicans in Congress said, no, we're not going to do that.
And we hate Republicans in Congress. Most of them, they suck.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them are disgusting. And can I also say, too, this is perhaps a different tangent, as I have met more and more like Doge adjacent people and sort of the more tech bro class, I think that a lot of the people, and honestly, Tim, I think it kind of goes back to your book, which is wonderful, and it's very well written, and I think it's quite interesting how a lot of people who I think are in the MAGA movement or pretend to be MAGA, and even what you're sort of saying, Cameron, with a lot of these Republican members of Congress, it's all performative and it's all fake, and they are narcissistic, and they do what they want to get ahead because they want to be on Fox, they want to have the soundbite. Most of the Republicans who are in the Doge caucus on the Hill are then voting to continue spending at Biden levels and continue spending money, God knows where, whatever. Meanwhile, I think the Doge crowd of people who have sort of come to DC, and in some ways, it's sort of like pick your poison.
You're talking about the big balls of the world.
Yes.
The guy that wanted to normalize Indian hate, right? Marco, those guys, those are the true believers.
That crowd. But I'm also talking even more at the higher levels, like just, I mean, like I said, I've been in DC for years now. When I go to the cocktail parties, it's just sort of, even though we're not allowed to go to the cocktail parties in Steve World, and I don't drink, but there's just more of like a San Francisco transplant vibe here. You know what I mean? Like kind of the techie crowd. And I just think it's an interesting dynamic because I think traditionally a lot of the MAGA stuff, and it's what your book sort of talked about, like was people who were lying because deep down they did support amnesty, but then they saw where the trends were going in the Republican Party. So they pretended to be really hardcore on immigration. And I think that the people who are in Doge, you're pulling from like people who actually want anonymity and are not trying to get ahead or advance their own career. They're genuinely doing the Doge stuff. These are very high IQ, brilliant techie people who would probably rather be in San Francisco, like doing the coding stuff. They're all probably like,
does anybody in the entire world want to be in San Francisco right now?
I mean, have you been to DC? It's not particularly great, but I'm just saying I think it's an interesting like cultural difference between the tech bro. They just want to actually, like, I literally met an autistic like Doge man who literally, I tried talking to him. He asked me, like, if Steve and Trump, he's like, I thought they hate each other. I was like, that was like 5 years ago. Like, he was like, oh, I don't follow politics. I literally just want to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. And I was like, are you, this just shtick? He was like, no, I just care about the waste, fraud, and abuse. My point being, it's just a different, it's not political. Like, they would never have a group chat where they're like sending emojis. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just
Would they have a group chat where they're sending? Would they have a group chat where they're sending war?
If it's not political, then why are they not making cuts across the board? Why are they not? People on the left keep saying, "Hey, when are the cuts to defense going to happen?" This is where we're seeing actual massive waste, fraud, and abuse, but we haven't seen that so far. They're even though it's having a direct impact on people's lives, it's relatively nickel and dime things that they're cutting in terms of they aren't budgets of $100 billion or $500 billion. There was the one thing famously where they claimed an $8 billion cut and it was only $8 million cut. But I think she brings up one of the points that she talked about back there was the lazy government workers and they're getting all this money and they're working from home and blah, 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 all of that. That's what drives much of this, I believe, in terms of the actual MAGA voters, the people who don't actually work in the government, and some of them actually who even do work in the government. I have a friend whose wife works in the government, and he talks about how she's the only one who does any work. You have a whole lot of people, I think this goes across the spectrum, but you have a whole lot of MAGA types who they think they're the only person who does anything. Everybody else is a lazy moocher. They're the only person who's actually pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and actually works hard, and everybody else is gaming the system and a moocher and a scammer and all of that. That's, I think, some of this where you have Elon talking about the scammers when it comes to Social Security. That resonates with some of them because they think everyone but them, well, of course I should get my Social Security and my parents should get their Social Security, but because they've done everything the right way. But everybody else, they're all just gaming the system. That's where I think much of this comes from and how they're able to sell this to a significant portion of the population. But let me know what you think about all of this. I think she's wrong about much of what she's saying. And I think Tim Miller and Cameron Kasky are correct here in that, they kept just kind of saying over and over again, how much do you think government workers make? I think everybody thinks they're making $250,000 a year when a lot of them are making $70,000 or whatever. Let me know in the comments what you think about what Natalie Winters had to say. What about Tim Miller? What you think about what Tim Miller had to say. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. This is Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.